Hi, I'm Nicole Roberts-Jones, and welcome to the first episode of the Meaningful Work Podcast. Now, you have to know, I'm excited to hold this space for you during these episodes so that you can find meaning and fulfillment in the work you do. Get it? That's what meaningful is. It's to go after a life full of meaning and fulfillment. And I'm sure you're saying, now, Nicole, what do you mean by that? So tell me, does any of this sound like you? Have you ever had the Monday blues? You know, on Sunday night when you are getting ready for work and you are dreading the thought of Monday morning. Maybe you're burned out, you're tired, you're frustrated, you hate your job, or maybe you are starting to feel like your job just is not a good fit because your boss keeps overlooking you promotion after promotion after promotion. Or maybe you just feel like there's got to be more to life than this. Now, if you're feeling any of those things or anything close to it, then I got to tell you, this podcast is a place for you. You are the exact reason I started this podcast. And why is this whole conversation important? So let me put it to you this way. Now, I was reading research in a Harvard Business Review article that showed meaningfulness is more important to us. Now, I want you to get this. Meaningfulness is more important to us than any other aspect of our jobs. See, when we experience our work as meaningful, we're more engaged, more committed, and more content. Listen, let me compare it like this. Meaningful work is a bit like being in love. Now, have you ever been in love? Now, I want you to think back to those first moments when you first fell in love. You remember how easy and right it felt? The sense of connection, satisfaction, excitement, that overall good feeling that being in love brought. Y'all remember that? Well, imagine feeling like that about your work. See, people who love their work are happier and even live longer. They're full of passion and enthusiasm. They're engaged. They're growing and go on, right? Now, if that doesn't sound like your relationship with work, then I got to tell you that you are not alone. See, meaningful work really is high on the corporate agenda. A study conducted by McKinsey & Company on meaning and purpose at work found that 70% of people are seeking purpose at work, but sadly, only 15% are getting it. And can I tell you, what many people overlook when it comes to this whole conversation of meaningful work is how to connect your work with God's greater purpose for your life. That is the ingredient that truly gives you the meaning and fulfillment that you greatly long for. So, my goal with this podcast is to give you all you need to do the work God intended for your life. Yes, God intended for us all to have and to do meaningful work. So some episodes I'm going to join you to teach you. As a college professor, a career development coach, a business coach, having worked with highly skilled professionals for the last 25 plus years, I'm going to pour into you strategy, tools, actionable insight that you can implement now to make the shift, the pivot, the change you need to go after work that sets your soul on fire. Now, in addition to that, I'm going to have guests from time to time. I'm going to invite entrepreneurs to join me and ministers, executives, people just like you to share their journey or to share their expertise in order to continue your learning. But before we start any of that, I really wanted to start our journey here with giving you the ingredients you need to go after meaningful work. But before I do that, let me share with you why I said yes to even start this podcast in the first place and why I even wanted to start it, right? So, over the last few years, I've got to tell you, I have felt a shift. I felt God shifting me to move beyond the work I was doing mostly with entrepreneurs, but to expand my work to encompass working with all professionals to understand how your work gives your life meaning. Matter of fact, what I know is God has called each of us to specific work. He has made us with, and I said this a few minutes ago, with great intention. And many of us, that work is outside of the church. It's in what I would call, and even dare I say what the Bible calls the marketplace. So with all that in mind, over the last few years, I've been studying. And when I say studying, I mean I've been studying and studying and studying. And one of the things that has come out of my study has been a shift of my own. So part to work more in the career development space. So as I record this episode, to add to my years of study and training and schoolwork, I'm working on my career development certification, right? I know some of y'all are saying, okay, Nicole, that's all great, but what does any of that have to do with me? Oh, hang tight. I'm getting ready to tell you, and you'll see exactly why this shift is holding the space for yours. See, part of my certification process, I've been tasked with doing an independent study. Now, the focus of my study is, now get this, how we harmonize our careers with our faith. It's how we infuse our lives with purpose and meaning, and how we each have a part to play in bringing the kingdom here on earth. See, matter of fact, my independent study is really a culmination of all the revelation that God has dropped in my spirit over the last few years that then led me to study on the subject of meaning of work. So I've been studying even more Bible scholars and other authors who have written books on the subject of God and work. Plus, I've been having some really, really great conversations. Those conversations have been so good that made me feel like, wait a minute, I should take these conversations and create a podcast. And guess what? Here we are. That's exactly how it happened. And so I'm excited about the space I'm going to hold with you and for you as we set sail on the Meaningful Work podcast. See, I'm going to hold the space for you and share behind the curtain conversations with you about what meaning and fulfillment looks like and how God created you just as you are. He was intentional and wants to use you as a catalyst to make impact in this world, specific impact. Listen, whether you work in Hollywood, in a hospital, in a boardroom, a courtroom, in a classroom, a boutique, or you sit in a corner office, what I know for sure is God has given each of us an arena to tend to and to keep. See, you don't have to be in a pulpit on any given Sunday to be doing God's work. And I want to open up a space so that you can begin to understand the part you play in bringing the kingdom here. See, I want you to understand how God has called each of us, yes, you and me, to bringing his kingdom here on earth. And before I even start to go in on that, can I keep it real with you for a minute? See, many churches tell us and really teach us that the Great Commission, which is found in Matthew 28:19 through 20, go read it again, Matthew 28:19 through 20, where Jesus says, make disciples of all nations, is the only work you should do as a Christian. And if you are a pastor, the minister, you're called to make disciples. But making disciples is not necessarily what we are each called to do. Now, don't get me wrong. We each are meant to let our light shine, as it says in Matthew 5:16, so that people can see your good works and glorify God. Yes, we're meant to do that. But what if you don't feel led to teach Sunday school or to do missionary work? Or what if you don't feel led to preach a sermon on Sunday? Does that mean that your work is not building God's kingdom? Let me tell you, no, it does not. See, in this podcast, I want you to understand you can equally be called to lead teams as you're called to missionary work. You can equally be called to be the superintendent of an elementary school as you are called to be the superintendent of Sunday school. You can equally be called to be an American Ballet Theater principal dancer, or you could be equally called to be Debbie Allen, as you are called to lead the praise dancers at church. See, every role we each play is a part in creating the beautiful world we live in. One is no less than the other. So, to help you further understand all that I just said, let me bring in a little Bible. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 12 through 27. Again, 1 Corinthians 12 through 27. Now, I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to read around it. So I'm going to encourage you to go back and read this when you have some time, okay? Say it one more time. 1 Corinthians 12 through 27. And it says, for as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body, being many, are one body. So also is Christ. For in fact, the body is not one member, but many. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I'm not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the eye should say, and if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I'm not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? If the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing? If the whole body were hearing, where would be the smelling? But now God has set the members, each one of them, in the body just as he pleased. And if they were all one member, where would the body be? But now, indeed, there are many members, yet one body. Now you are the body of Christ and members individually. deep, right? I really want you to get this. Again, that was 1 Corinthians 12 through 27. And see, just as it says in that Bible verse, we each play a significant part, a significant role in creating this world. See, God gifted each of us as part of one body. Each of our gifts, just like the various parts of our body, come together to work in order to create the kingdom here on earth. So, my goal in this podcast is to help you see it and get the tools to live as the highest and best version of who God created you to be in the specific way He created you to be and do it so you can get in the role that He assigned for you. We all are called and assigned. So to help you understand this, let me start by sharing with you what is our commission, the mandate that God gave to all of us well before the book of Matthew, way before that. Now, I got to tell you, when God led me to this Bible verse, I'm laughing, but you'll see why in a minute. It was back in 2018. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you've heard this story. But before I go in, I got to tell it to you, right? When God dropped this Bible verse in my spirit now some 7 years ago, as I record this episode, little did I know that it would start a path of study and expansion of my own calling that has led me here with you right now. And it all started with Genesis 1:28 that says, "Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Again, that's Genesis 1:28. Now listen, when God first dropped that verse in my spirit, I thought God was trying to tell me to have kids. Now, if you know, by the way, in 2018, I was 48 years old and I was like, I am not feeling like Sarah. Now, listen, y'all, if you know the story of Sarah and Abraham, also, not Sarah and Abraham. Yeah, it is Sarah and Abraham, also in Genesis, where they had a baby in their old age. Well, I was not feeling that. So instead, what God began to show me was that is one interpretation. But what I learned in that moment was actually what I began to teach my entrepreneurial clients, which are the tools to multiply, what I call bankrolling your brilliance. But since that time, I've realized it's not just a call to entrepreneurs. It's a call to each and every one of us, to all of us, to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it, to have dominion. I'm going to go deeper in all of those concepts in our next 3-part episode, so make sure you go listen to that. But listen, if you go and read Adam and Eve's story, which is where we see God give us this mandate, again, that was Genesis 1:28. If we go deeper into it, in Genesis 2:15 is where God says, "Then the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden to tend and keep it." But if I want to really get deep, what happened in that moment was God was even telling Adam and Eve to go and do the work to maintain what I have created. But can I tell you, even before Adam and Eve worked, guess what? God worked. Think about it. The first thing we read in the Bible is God working as He created the world. See, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earths. Creating means to work. Come on, y'all. It didn't say God spoke. It didn't say God thought it, although He could have done it either way. Instead, God chose to work. Listen, I want you to get this. According to Webster's, so you understand what I mean when I'm saying create, the word create means to bring into existence, to produce or bring about by a course of action or behavior. See, God chose to bring the world into existence by a course of action. Now, listen, I want to really encourage you to go and read, if you've never read it, and if you have, go reread it, Genesis, the first chapter, and note how God created the world, step by step, piece by piece, how He created the sky, the water, the land, how He created light and separated it from darkness, forming day and night, how He created plants and how He created the sun and moon and stars. And then God fills the earth with water and sky, right? And He takes, He fills the earth, the water with fish, and He fills the sky with birds. And then Finally, he creates all the rest of the animals. And his grand finale is creating you and me, created man to populate the land. He did this as he worked 6 days. Oh, and again, I'm going to give you some points that I'm going to highlight so you understand fully what I mean by meaningful work. So guess what? I actually went into the first point. So as I share with you all that God accomplished as he created the world in the first book of Genesis, and again, I want to encourage you to read that. I really was going into point number 1, which is, you ready? Number 1, for those of you that like to write, understand that God worked. And before I give you point number 2, for those of you saying to yourself, Nicole, everything you talked about is great, but that's all Old Testament. So those of you that are skeptical, let me give you some New Testament and give you an example of Jesus speaking about work. And by the way, y'all know Jesus was a carpenter. Hello. Before he started preaching and going around and doing miracles, right? So John 9:4, he says this. This is Jesus saying this. John 9:4, he says, I must work the works of him who sent me. I must work the works of him who sent me. I said this Bible verse earlier, but by the way, Matthew 5:16 is one of my favorite Bible verses. If you've been around me, you hear me say it all the time. So I really feel like this is part of my mandate too. And it says this, let your light so shine before men, I always add, and women, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. See, even that Bible verse says that they may see your what? Good works. Even further in Luke, there's a story where Jesus' parents had gone to Jerusalem, as they did every year. It was the feast of Passover. But this particular year, when Jesus was 12, they lost him. They couldn't find him. Now, if you have kids or if you have nieces and nephews and you've ever been to a carnival or to Disneyland or some large park and you look up and your child is missing. Have you ever experienced that? Well, I know I have, and the feeling that I felt. And so imagine Mary, Jesus' mom and dad. They were frantic, stressed out, looking for their son. And everywhere they looked, they couldn't find him. And it wasn't just a few hours. He was missing for days. Now, listen, if this happened in modern times, there would have been an Amber Alert. They would have had a news breaking news and did a press conference because it was 3 days later, y'all. And 3 days later, they find him. And where is Jesus? He's in the temple sitting with the teachers of that day, and they are sitting and listening to him. And I don't know about y'all, but if I was Mary, I would have ran up to him and snatched his arm and said, have you lost your mind? Right? And so whatever Mary said to him in that moment, here is what Jesus says back to her in Luke 2:49. He says, why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? So all of that is God showing us that we're each meant to work. So my goal in this podcast is to support you in being about your Father's business in whatever way he created you to tend to and keep it. Not to do this, now to do this work, I got to make sure you understand a couple things, right? You ready? Number 2, for those of you that are taking notes, here's number 2. To understand, you got to understand that God created us in his image. You were created in God's image. Listen, Genesis 1:27 says this. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. Now, mind you, I just read Genesis 1:28 a few minutes ago. This is 1:27, which is right before that, okay? So if we are to be God's image bearers, then part of the way we carry on his example is by doing exactly what he did as he started the world, is in our work. Think about it. The word image means the general impression that a person, an organization, or product presents to the public. So what do you think about when you hear that? What that makes me think of is we are like God's representatives in the specific arena he created you to represent in. The point is, as we represent, the point is that we glorify the original. That's how we let our light shine. See, God made humans in his image so that the world would be filled with reflectors of himself doing the work he created us to do. In other words, our lives are meant to magnify the original. To break this down a little bit, I did a little more research. Y'all know I love to research some things. And when I looked up magnify, I looked up microscopes. Now listen, we're meant to magnify His glory like a telescope, not a microscope. See, microscopes make small things look bigger than they are. Telescopes make exceptionally big things more tangible to be seen and understood, to be able to see exactly what it is. And that's what our lives are meant to be. Examples of God so people can see and experience God. Y'all get that? So specifically, God's intention for us is to reflect Him, and that is why He intentionally gifted you and crafted you exactly how you are. And the more you understand both your skills and talents, as well as growing in your understanding of your DNA, and by the way, you're going to hear me say DNA a lot. Anytime you hear me say DNA, I'm talking about your distinct natural ability. So as we understand and grow in our understanding of our DNA, your giftedness and the role it's meant to play in this world, as well as growing in your relationship with the Creator who gifted you in the first place, the more you reflect His image. See, we are each given specific work to do, which is God's way of giving each of us a little piece of who He is, right? We are each different and have different gifts. And as we operate in our giftedness, one serving the next, we bring the kingdom here on earth. Let me give you an example. I remember hearing T.D. Jakes in a sermon once say, God did not create a chair. He didn't. What God created was the tree. He gifted a man to invent a chair from the tree, which means, and even you'll see this as you read Genesis, God knows what we need before it's needed, and He makes provision for it. That provision for it is the skills and talents that are locked inside of you, which moves us to point number 3. You are needed and necessary. That's right. You are an answer to a need. But God gives you free will to choose to be the answer. For you to choose to allow your gift to be the provision of a need that somebody has been looking for, and dare I even say that somebody's been praying for. So let me bring in some Bible to help you understand here too. Continuing with the creation story. Now, I've already read Genesis 1:27 and 28. So now I'm going to read Genesis 1:29 through 30. Again, Genesis 1:29 through 30. So God said, see, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed is in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I've given every green plant for food. And so it was so. See, this passage shows us God provides for our needs. See, when God created the universe, He gave us means to feed every living thing. He gave it to us, but we have to work to obtain it. See, God's not going to fish for you. He's not going to lay eggs for you. God is not going to milk a cow for you. But those of us who are longshoremen or are farmers, as well as those of us that work in grocery stores, the clerks, the produce truck drivers, the executives that work in the corporate office at your favorite grocery store. See, all those people do what they do. And when they do what they do is the reason you have food in your refrigerator. Come on, somebody, right? Are you getting that? See, I need you to fully understand that we each share in doing the things that God has done in creation, bringing order out of chaos, creating and building the world around us, caring and healing the sick, and go on and on. But I really want you to understand the material creation was made by God to be developed and cultivated and cared for in an endless number of ways through you and me, by us. So, this also means secular work is just as meaningful to God as a sacred work of ministry. It is. So let me give you another example. Now, I hope I'm going to get all of this story right. Now, I was reading in a book, the founder of Wilberforce University, which by the way is a HBCU, if you've never heard of it, in Ohio. When Wilberforce became a Christian, or as my grandmother would say, when he got saved, he was thinking of resigning his seat in the British Parliament and just ending his political career altogether. Like many of us do, right? Wilberforce thought the only path to serving God was to quit his job and pursue something in the ministry. Now, because he wasn't exactly sure of this decision, he reached out to a longtime friend who happened to be a pastor. His name was John Newton, and he reached out to John Newton for advice. Now, Reverend Newton told him something different than what he had expected. See, Newton encouraged Wilberforce to stay where he was. He told him that God could use him there. So, what did Wilberforce do? What did William Wilberforce do? He dedicated his political career to the suppression of the slave trade throughout the British Empire. Now, I want y'all to get this. Days before he died, the House of Commons passed a bill that freed more than 800,000 African slaves. So you think God didn't know exactly what he wanted to use William Wilberforce for? And he placed that desire in his heart to go into politics. Matter of fact, his work was not only on the slave trade. When I was reading, I realized he did so much more. He worked toward limiting children's working hours. He worked on prison reform and policing and education and healthcare and gambling issues and the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And I'm saying the wrong name because this is in the UK, but I want you to get this. Tell me this man was not being fruitful in the arena that God created him to dwell in. Matter of fact, I saw a quote that someone wrote about William Wilberforce right after his death. And this is what it said. It said this: "It's difficult to escape the verdict that William Wilberforce was simply the greatest social reformer in the history of the world." And imagine what would not have been accomplished had he quit politics and decided to go into full-time ministry. Imagine all the work that would not have been done. Imagine had Wilberforce not understood his assignment. So I shared Wilberforce's story because in the same way, God has given each of us, you and me, gifts to be able to stand in the gap and provide in some certain way for each other. And that's exactly why your work is important to God. So I'm going to dig more into that in our next episodes, but let me just say this. God gifted each of us with DNA. And again, what's DNA, y'all? Distinct natural ability. And with it, we each have a role to play as God's great plan to profit for all. Now, you're going to hear me say profit a lot too. So let me tell you that the word profit, go look it up. The meaning of profit means to gain. So your gifts are to be a gain, not just for you via your paycheck, but a gain for all those that need you. 1 Corinthians 12:7, bringing in some Bible real quick, says this: "But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all." But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. Deep, right? And as others gain from our gifts and talents, it's God's desire that we, number 4, live a life of meaning and fulfillment. That's God's gain back to us. Now, again, I'm not going to drill deep here. This is what I next 3 episodes are about, as I taught you from the fulfillment formula, where I'm going to give you the keys to defining the work that's meaningful for you, the work that aligns with how God crafted and created you. So listen, my goal in this podcast series is just as it says in 3 John 1:2. 3 John 1:2. "I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers." See, meaningful work is tied to your soul being able to prosper. Matter of fact, when you ever hear me say do work that sets your soul on fire, yeah, that's where I got that from. I got that from God wanting your soul to prosper. See, God wants us to prosper in all things. Now, typically, I'm going to tell you, when I hear the word prosper, what comes in my mind? I want to ask you, what comes in yours first? See, when I think of prosper, it makes me think of money and material possessions and things like that, right? However, prosperity is really much more than that. So you guys already know I looked up what does prosper mean. So the Greek word for prosper means to succeed in an enterprise or activity, to become strong and flourishing. Good, right? So then, continuing to study this word, I looked it up in Strong's Bible Concordance. And here's a definition that was there. Again, this is the word prosper's definition there. To help on the road, to succeed in reaching, to succeed in business affairs, to have a prosperous journey. In other words, a soul that is prospering means you are helping all those that need you. It means you're doing well, you're producing a good result. And as you do that, you're thriving. You're thriving, which causes every area of your life to thrive. See, I want you to think about it. Work takes up how much of your time? It takes up 80% of your life. 5 out of 7 days in our week we spend working. And if you hate your job, it then trickles into your emotions and creates stress, regret, frustration, which also shows up in who you be with whoever gets to experience you, your kids, your mate, your coworkers, your boss, your friends. It also hinders your productivity, which keeps you from being able to be fruitful and multiplying. And why would God want any of that for you? See, instead, God's will for you is to prosper in all things. Again, the Bible verse says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things." See, life is a journey, and God's will is that it be a prosperous one. So, I'm going to bring in some more Bible. Jeremiah, by the way, I love Jeremiah's story in the Bible. God says this to Jeremiah in Jeremiah 29:11. He says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." See, God had a plan for you at birth, a plan to prosper you and not to harm you, a plan to give you hope and a future. And so he created you with intention, with a unique purpose. And when you fully activate it, you live a meaningful life. Essentially, God wants to see his creation experience his happiness that comes when you live as the highest and best version of who he created you to be. Now, don't worry, I'm going to give you the steps. I'm going to go deep and give you all the tools you need in our next episodes. For now, here's what I want you to know as we set sail on this podcast. It's God who gave you gifts and talents and then gave you the mandate to tend to the earth and keep it by doing the very thing he crafted and created you to do. And as you do that, his gift back to you is to live a meaningful life. It's that your soul prospers. It's that your soul be on fire. So in this podcast, we will explore what meaningful means, not just in your work, but in every area of your life. Because again, I said this a minute ago, everywhere you show up, you bring you, right? Which affects your work. So we'll also explore meaningful in regards to your relationships. We'll explore meaningful health, meaningful in regards to children and family and your money, and even meaningful in your relationship with God. See, I want you to really, really understand this as I begin to wrap this first episode. God wants you to prosper. He wants you to prosper in every area of your life. And my goal is to give you tools and to do just as Jesus said a little while ago. I read this, Luke 2:49, I think it was, that Jesus said to be about his Father's business. Now, before I close, let me invite you. If you have any questions you would like me to address during episodes of this podcast, I want to invite you to send me an email at info@NicoleRobertsJones.com. I would love to hear from you. Now, let me ask you second, if you found this episode helpful, please share. Please share it on social media. And I'm not asking you to share it to grow my following, but you never know who in your network, your friends, your family may be working toward the same goal. And then you can grow together. So as we start our journey of this podcast, here's something I want to invite you to reflect on. You ready? Got your pen? Why did God gift you in the first place? In what way are you using your DNA, your distinct natural ability to tend to the earth and keep it? And I should say to tend to the kingdom here on earth and keep it. To be fruitful and to multiply in the arena God created you to dwell in. That is our mandate. And really, that is my mandate to help you answer and to understand. As I say to you, welcome to the Meaningful Work Podcast.